But I suppose this then kind of needs us to answer the question, is concurrent training going to be harmful to your gains then? Are you going to do this? What we've just suggested, do some background activity, do some maybe aerobic conditioning on a separate day, and then maybe add in some anaerobic conditioning at the end of your training sessions. Is that going to kill your gains, Gary?
Yeah, I would say it exists on a spectrum. Okay. So I think if you're a competitive bodybuilder, you need to think about this stuff a lot more, because surprisingly, a lot of competitive bodybuilders actually don't. Like, they'll do their cardio um fasted, deliberately all of the time. And sometimes they're pushing quite hard, and kind of leaving out some of the key sports nutrition principles that they would apply if it was a weight training session. So I would say that, like, if you're doing cardio, as a bodybuilder, you need to be thinking, right, am I really digging into my recovery resources? Am I really pushing into catabolism here at a point where maybe I don't want to do that? Like, if you're dieting for fat loss, let's say, and you're doing a 1.5 hour leg session, and then you do an hour of cardio after that, and you didn't have any intra workout nutrition or anything, it would actually be wise during that cardio session to, start sipping on some carbohydrates, plus or minus some whey protein or essential amino acids or something, just to start to, minimize any effects that might kick in, because context always matters with the level of interference. And, while 30 minutes or an hour of cardio isn't going to have a significant interference in isolation, if performed after a leg session and you're using your legs again, and you're now delaying the refueling process, that might have a bit more of a significant effect. For the general population, I wouldn't even worry about it. It's just not that big a deal. But for that individual who's trying to maximize every ounce of muscle, that might matter a bit more. So for the most part, I think that I see very little interference between, very little interference between the muscle and cardiorespiratory adaptations in individuals who are just adding in a bit of cardio to try to improve their fitness. Like, most people are going to be doing something like maybe 30 minutes 3 times a week. Very few people do more than that. Some people might do up to kind of 150, 180, minutes per week, but it's quite rare, to be honest. And most people who do that, they're doing it at a relatively low intensity. So I just wouldn't be worried about it interfering. With that said, the main place where it is going to start to interfere more is when people are in that deficit, they're dieting, and they're trying to burn as many calories as they can rather than reducing their calories through nutrition. And what you end up doing here is that not only are you creating the deficit for your fat loss, but you're also creating an additional recovery deficit because you're doing so much activity. And this is especially the case where people start to do, as I said previously, where they go on the Stairmaster and they go on the incline treadmill, or they're cycling, they're hitting 160, 170, 180 beats per minute for 45 to 60 minutes every single day. Like, that's almost certainly going to interfere. But again, that's not what we're recommending. So don't do that, and you won't run into these issues, I think.
I would consider the issue one of under recovery for the vast majority of the reason people say,
Yeah.
oh, there's a concurrent, training, like it's harmful for your gains. Now, obviously, this goes up to a point, and that point is probably around, and we've discussed this before, and we've gone into figures and stuff, but it's probably around the point where your gastrointestinal system just can't absorb more food. And like, there's figures thrown around that's 1.5 times or 2 times your like basal metabolic rate or whatever. But there's probably a point where you could eat more food, but it's actually not going to lead to better recovery overall. Like, you're just at the limit of how much you can actually absorb, right? So it's probably, you can get up to that point, and then after that, you're not going to be able to out eat the recovery demands of this or out sleep it or whatever. So that's not what we're recommending. Like, again, we're not recommending you go out and do, a marathon training and 6 resistance training sessions. Like, that's obviously not going to be effective. Like, if you're just doing like minimal effective dose to still get results, again, we're saying like, 15 minutes max at the end of your resistance training session of anaerobic work, and you're saying you're training 4 days per week, like, what's that? An hour extra of anaerobic work, like cardio work, and then we'll say you do an hour of aerobic work then on a Saturday or something. Like, realistically, if 2 hours of cardio across an entire week on top of 4 hours of resistance training is the thing that completely derails you, like, we'll say that's literally 6 total hours of work, like there's probably something else going on, right? Because there's athletes out there, college athletes, student athletes that have other stuff going on, and they're training 6 hours a day, So in my mind, I'm like, you either brought this intervention in too early, weren't adapted to it, weren't able to adapt to it in terms of the speed at which you brought it in, or you're not sleeping, you're not recovering, you're not eating well, your stress is too high, all these other things start coming into it. Because again, 6 hours of work throughout the week, that should be relatively easy to recover from if you're doing the general things we talk about, correctly. Right now, obviously, there's going to be certain populations that's going to be way too much work or whatever. But again, that's what all of this programming stuff is supposed to be about. It's about finding the effective doses for what you want. If you find yourself constantly not recovered, then we're doing too much. We need to pull it back, right? But that would be my perspective. Do you have anything else to add on to this, Gary, finally?
No, I think that covers everything. And like, I would just reiterate the point that we covered a lot more detail than this in the full cardio series. So do please refer back to that if you'd like more information, particularly on some of the more specifics around programming and different goals, etc.